You and Colby Oldman, released a joint statement after the killing of George Floyd. What was your conversation like with Colby when you were having those discussions about how to address this?
It was born out of frustration. It was born out of, a feeling of exhaustion that we seem to be going through this vicious cycle over and over and over again. And the frustration stemmed from, when these things happen, we always react. And, people are upset, people are enraged, there's protesting. And then it seems as if once the cameras stop rolling and another incident, takes over the media cycle, all this stuff dies down, and then we don't do anything again until the next time it happens. So our conversation became about what can we do to help prevent these things from happening instead of always being in a position where we're reacting. Colby and I are very fortunate to be a part of a league like you guys were talking about that supports, civil rights and people being able to be themselves, and social justice. Colby and I are also very fortunate to work for an organization that has been pushing for these types of objectives and inclusion before this, came to pass. You look at how many organizations in the pro sports world that do have a black general manager and a black head coach. So we are fortunate to be in the position that we're in. Our organization completely supported us. You guys saw, their statement on the heel of our statement. But now, instead of just talking, our organization has had many conversations, organization-wide from top to bottom about what we do next. And that's what, to me, is the most important thing is where do we go from here and, stop making statements and get into action.
I'm curious, as you mentioned, this being born out of frustration and this being a conversation that you and others and this league in the NBA has had continually. Is there anything about this time around, because I've heard other people that bring this up, that feels different, that feels like there might be more hope for what comes next?
Yeah, and it's just personally, I feel so much more encouraged by the circumstances and the situation we're in when I'm listening to the voices of other people. And it's not just black people anymore who are, calling for change. The committee that we joined or that we started with the Coaches Association, the Committee on Racial Injustice and Reform, is filled with a diverse group of people. And the conversations that we had over the weekend informing, our plans moving forward and the actions that we're willing to take, left me encouraged. There are some brilliant voices on those calls, from Lloyd Pierce, David Fisdale, Stan Van Gundy, Steve Kerr, Pop, Rick Carlisle, Brett Brown, Quinn Snyder, Doc Rivers. Like, I don't want to, leave anybody out, but you go down the list and there are some brilliant people on those calls who are ready to do instead of just talking. And I sit there and I think about it. If it's just, if there's that many brilliant minds just from our small circle, and I look at all the other people and all the other, organizations and people in positions of leadership, if they do the same thing, if they just bring their minds and their intelligence and their will to the cause, think of all the things that we can accomplish. And it's going to take the people to get it done. I think that's first and foremost is every single one of us, it's time to play our part. Get off the sidelines, get in the game, and wherever you're comfortable. You don't have to do, these huge undertakings. The conversations you have with your family, the conversations you have with your kids, those are all things that we're all capable of doing that can impact change that we're looking for.
JB Bickerstaff joining us, Cleveland Cavaliers head coach. And again, the National Basketball Coaches Association formed this committee the Committee on Racial Injustice and to Reform to pursue solutions within NBA cities. So Coach, listen, you're saying, and other people are starting to say it as well, there are protests out there, and I know we absolutely want to lean toward the peaceful protests. There are statements from everybody out there. But at some point, the protests stop. We start to get back to quote-unquote regular life, though that's been anything but this year. And then there needs to be the next step. And I believe that's what you're talking about, the action. So what is with this committee? You said it was a great conversation over the weekend. What were some of the things that you talked about as far as actionable things in NBA cities to start helping?
Well, I think, the interaction between our communities and police and law enforcement agencies is, a huge beginning. And how do we bridge that gap and erase some of the tension that's creating the situations that we keep seeing? How do we impact the education? How do we impact training? How do we impact recruitment when it comes to law enforcement? Those are discussions that we've had. Working with, national groups that have local chapters that are already tied in, to the community, that have, webs to political leaders, that have webs to law enforcement agencies, lawyers who understand, the legislation that needs to be passed or changed to hold people accountable. Those are all things that we've discussed, and the education of people and getting people to register to vote and understanding, how important the local elections are. I think we spend a ton of time focusing on the national elections, but an understanding that, it's the local elections and those governing forces that make the decisions that impact, our communities the most.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.